On top of that, there's a whole set of other communities that must be engaged, must be involved, and there are Indigenous communities. We have to be not just the Northeastern Ontario Municipal Association. We have to be looking at this Mushkegowuk, Waban Tribal Council area, the Moose River Basin and the Upper Ottawa, the Upper Sturgeon and the Upper Spanish systems. That really encompass both those tribal councils.
You're very passionate about that. I mean, as I've worked with you now for a couple of months, you're very passionate about that particular issue. You're involved directly, and it's not something that is popped up for you in the moment or in the heat of, if you will, a political campaign. This is something that you've been a part of for a long time.
Yeah, my first exposure to Indigenous relations was with Placer Dome. And it started, I guess, when I was transferred to Vancouver. But I should back up. You know, when I was raised here, I remember being in a public speaking contest when I was in grade school at the Dome Public School, and I did my public speaking contest or my entry on the history of the Porcupine Camp. And I could tell you from 1907, or actually before that, when they did the surveys and found gold on the Tisdale-Whitney boundaries, and I read everything I could, and I had everything from the Hunters to George and John Bannerman to John Wilson to Harry Preston to Sandy McIntyre to Benny Hollinger, and all of them in sequence exactly. You know, what happened in the 1919 strikes, the 1929 or 1928 Hollinger fire disaster, all the way through. But my history started with the discovery of gold. My knowledge of history started here with the discovery of gold in the Porcupine. I knew nothing about the eon of history before that. I knew a little bit about fur trading routes and stuff like that, but it was kind of like anecdotal. That had died off a long time ago. That wasn't really, I knew a little bit about, you know, Hudson's Bay, but we didn't have any permanent forts here, if you will. We didn't have any permanent establishments. So I knew very little. But I certainly knew nothing about exactly what had happened here. So my first experience, transferred to Vancouver, and joining an international team, going to Alaska, where we had the Donlin Creek project. That project, a very remote, rich, low-grade gold deposit. And first time in my experience, who's it owned by? The Chilista. Now, the U.S. government, when they discovered oil on the North Shore, needed, of course, to get the oil from the North Shore to the Port of Valdez. What did they need to do? They needed to address the myriad of concerns with the Indigenous population that they never had to before. Their experience, of course, south of the lower 48, largely ignored those questions. Alaska, they had to deal with it. What did they do? Well, it's simplifying a very complex agreement, but they formed 13 native corporations. That's what they did. They were called native corporations. A lot of grandfathering and everything else. But I dealt with the Chilista. As a business person, I knew exactly who I was dealing with. I dealt with them as though they were the same as I would deal with somebody down Highway 101 that's a farmer that's got 160 acres and we think there's a gold deposit on their land. You deal with the owner. And they had title to that resource. The Chilista did. And it was streamlined. You knew you had a willing business partner. I saw something that worked, that wasn't caught up in a morass or entanglement of inaction with layers of government being involved, which typically had been and is still the Canadian story. It worked. Significant because you had an engaged population, fully understanding of the economic benefit that they had under them, and what that economic benefit was going to mean to their community. Hey, different model.
Yeah.
Different model. I was lucky enough to work with Placidoma Musselwhite and go through the sensitivity training, if you will, and full knowledge of what those, the history of those Indigenous communities in remote fly-in, fly-out, or winter road access communities. Was involved when we had changed those agreements to revenue sharing agreements. Saw the result within those communities of the economic benefit directly into those communities, working together. And capacity isn't something you build overnight. It's a process of engagement. It's a process of setting the table, resetting the table, resetting the table, engaging, because the goal is there. And the goal is for the benefit of all of Canada. All of Canada. And I was extremely happy to see the mining sector, because we're there on the front lines working with the communities. And the direct results of those communities are apparent. You know, the residential schools, treaty systems, social consequences of all of that are there. And you can't help but feel a very direct responsibility when you understand the Indian Act was studied by the South Africans before they put the laws of apartheid in. Does that make you proud as a Canadian? Do we know that as Canadians? No. Should we? Yes. The Indigenous community didn't get the vote, I don't believe, till 1962 or 1963. We'll check that date. I was stunned to learn that. I did not know that they were granted the full rights of citizens vis-a-vis their vote until the 60s. And we look down our nose on, you know, civil rights movements and, you know, treatments of others just south of us, and we have no pedestal to stand on. And yet we continue not to teach our history. So it was then a process of personal growth, understanding the treaty systems, how they were signed, with rush to get them done, with people that couldn't read, relying totally on the Indian agent or and getting the elders or the chiefs to put an X. Total shame, if you will. And something that we have to correct. We absolutely have to correct. The Indigenous population is the fastest growing population that we have in Canada. They stay here, work here, want to work here, raise their family here. And every parent in the world wants the same thing. They want their children to have a better lifestyle, a better standard of living than they do. And they want their children to be smarter than them. They want to believe they're smarter than them. They want to ensure they're smarter than them. And that is a universal belief, and I have traveled the world, and that is a universal belief. So, in my opinion, that's the goal. In my opinion, we've got an opportunity in Timmins to do that training. When we talk about the Indigenous peoples, there's 3 things we must do. I've had questions about racism. What's your solution to racism? There is not a check box that you can fill that says this is a solution to racism. It's generational. And you want to make sure that your granddaughter that's going to an Indigenous daycare or has an opportunity to go to an Indigenous daycare and learn right there. Marvelous experience. Absolutely, that sets the table right there, because they are smarter. You know, any individual child intermingling with them, other people, other kids that they're playing with, that's just whoever it might be. Susie, Sam, Peter, Paula, whatever names you choose out there. They're good buddies. They play together. There's no bias. Right in the sandbox, they leave the bias of their parents behind. That's part of the solution. Educate ourselves. Educate our children. Educate or provide the opportunity for our children to be educated, not necessarily by us. Educate others around you. And then you must engage. You must engage. Once you've gone through this process of understanding what the background is, what the history is, what traditional territory really means, then you must engage, and you must engage everybody around you. That's the individual that will say, oh, I guess we're on Indian time. Stop it. Leave it behind. Leave it in the dustbin of history. The sooner we leave those types of comments, and am I pure or pious or perfect? No. But understand that's what we must do. We must do. That's the engage. Engage everybody in this process. And then enlist our population in moving it forward, seeing the bigger picture. Enlist everybody around you in, I will call it, this movement, this change. Understand and embrace. There's been a huge pushback and resentment. The Supreme Court of Canada's decisions on this term consultation. And I was no different. I saw it and I thought, oh, gee, you know, it's just going to be, does it really solve anything? And it's a typical business guy's view. There's got to be a solution. Let's move forward. Let's get the tick mark. I want that property, or I'd like to get on that property. Gee, this isn't helping anything. I've come to realize, and I realized that in short order, that this process is very, very, very wise. There's a wisdom to it, because it allows us to be part of this sea change in understanding our Indigenous population, where they're from, their history in relation to what they've been going through, our part of it, our role in it, to understand and then weave this social fabric of Canada. Continue to weave the social fabric of Canada so we emerge, whether it be 10 or 20 or 30, whatever it is, stronger. So it can't be pulled apart. That we've got this social fabric that recognizes we have just woven this rich cultural mosaic into a tighter pattern, a tighter weave that will be strong enough to survive anything from the outside. And I wanted to say we have the opportunity to do that here in Timmins. And why must we do that in Timmins? Because of we can see it around us. When I work with John Kimbell, Aboriginal Achievement Awards, he said it best, and that was marvelous, because they were trying to gather all the role models and celebrate the role models and successes, so that the kids could see, I can get that done. There's a role model, whether it be Robbie Robertson or Jonathan Chichu or anybody else, arts, cultural, athletic, business. Here they are. And he said the kids are voting with their feet. And where are they voting? Where are they voting to? They're voting for Toronto. They're voting to Toronto. Sorry. They're voting for Montreal, Winnipeg, Vancouver, Thunder Bay. We must succeed. You can see it happening here in Timmins. We must succeed, because failure is not, status quo is not an option. And failure looks like the tragedies that we see on a regular basis in Winnipeg, and what we're seeing on a more regular basis, a continuing basis, in Thunder Bay. We must change now. We can change now. We can engage everybody in this population. We're a small enough town, small enough city to engage. It's not difficult. It's not difficult to engage. It's not to start this process. And what I would propose for Northern Ontario is, we've got to repair those Northeastern Ontario Municipal Association, but that should be grown to include representation from the Mushkegowuk, the Waban, these communities. I work with Waugashing Resources, so that they have a say and an impact, and can fully say, this is the effect of the migration of people and persons and families. This is the effect of the degradation of the culture. This is the effect of substance abuse that might start in a larger center and then migrate. This is the effect. So we're there working together for a solution. I would call it a Senate, if you will. Initially, no legislative powers, However, the power comes that everybody's together and then working towards solution, full recognition. And look, these are the traditional territories. I don't think there's been too many people that I know of that schedule their winter vacation to go up to Attawapiskat or Moose Factory or Fort Albany or any of the other, the cache. They'll go to Florida, they'll go to Jamaica or anything else, they'll go to Mexico. These people, this Indigenous population, Métis population as well, but have been on the land. They've been there. They've been there. They're the ones that have that century of loss. This reconciliation process just isn't a word, and it isn't a panel sitting at the front listening to stories and the process of healing. Sure, it involves listening. Process of healing involves moving together with full recognition of the social fabric of this community and what must be done. And Timmins can be a beacon for Northern Ontario, can be a beacon for Ontario, and can be a beacon for Canada. Because we will look at it differently with the full involvement of all our partners. That's how strongly I feel about this.
If you were to, and this is, I guess, to wrap things up, in terms of priorities, in terms of your, let's say, your top 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 priorities, I'm guessing this is right at or near the top.
Sure, it has to be. It has to be. We can't do it without it. We can't even begin to think about being a successful community without it. We can't. We won't be. Because if we're not successful, instead of weaving that social fabric together, it will be torn.
Shame on us.
Shame on us. The opportunity is there now to be seized. We've got to get to the point that everybody that is here now involved in this will say, and the kids will say, 30 years later, I was part of that process. We did it. I was part of that process. And the wisdom from the Supreme Court comes from the fact that they're allowing communities, individuals, partners to weave that fabric so this is getting done together. Emancipation Proclamation was a War Measures Act, if you want to call that, in 1863. Lincoln freed the slaves in the Confederate States in an attempt to shorten the war. Brilliant proclamation. Celebrated as such, and I don't want to make any comparison other than the fact that because it was not woven into the fabric of those communities, of that society, 100 years later, the black people are still fighting to get into restaurants. They're still fighting to get into washrooms because the process wasn't celebrated and woven. The beauty of this nebulous concept of consultation means work together, weave this fabric so it can't be pulled apart. Will it be easy? No. But it must be done. It must be done. Full recognition of the past, full recognition of the future, full recognition of all the benefits our society, economically and societally, that can accrue to us. And it can be done here in Timmins. It can be started here in Timmins in a myriad of ways. So am I passionate about it? Yes.